The sledgehammer crashed through the pool's concrete edge as Sarah Miller demolished what was rightfully hers, but her neighbor Karen stood screaming into her phone, 911. Yes, I need police now, she's destroying my property. The sirens were already wailing in the distance when Sarah's lawyer called with news that would flip everything upside down. Karen's face drained of color as the police cars pulled up, but they weren't there for Sarah. 20 years of lies, forged documents, and stolen land were about to explode in the most spectacular fashion, and Karen had just handed herself over to justice on a silver platter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the backyard as Sarah Miller raised the sledgehammer above her head for what she hoped would be the final blow. Sweat dripped down her face despite the cool October air, and her shoulders ached from 3 hours of demolition work. The concrete edge of the swimming pool cracked with a satisfying thud, sending chunks flying across the yard she'd called home for 15 years. That's it, she whispered, wiping her brow with the back of her work glove. Finally done with this nightmare. The pool had been nothing but trouble from day one. What should have been a dream addition to a property had become a source of constant harassment, legal threats, and sleepless nights. All because of Karen Hutchins, the woman who lived in the sprawling colonial next door and had somehow convinced herself that half of Sarah's backyard belonged to her. Sarah stepped back to survey her work. The kidney-shaped pool that had cost her $30,000 was now a crater of broken concrete and twisted rebar. It would take weeks to fill in properly, but at least the source of conflict would be gone. Maybe then she could have some peace. She was loading debris into the rented dumpster when the screaming started. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah's stomach dropped. She turned slowly to see Karen Hutchins marching across the yard, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair bouncing with each angry step. Even at 9 in the morning, Karen looked like she'd stepped out of a country club brunch, cream-colored slacks, silk blouse, and enough jewelry to fund a small car purchase. Good morning, Karen, Sarah said, keeping her voice level. Just taking care of some property maintenance. Property maintenance? Karen's voice climbed to a shriek. You're destroying my pool. It's my pool, Karen. On my property. We've been over this 100 times. Karen's face flushed red. That pool is on the property line. Half of it belongs to me, and you know it. Sarah had heard this same argument for 3 years running. It started the summer after she'd installed the pool, when Karen suddenly decided that the decades-old property survey was wrong. Despite multiple professional surveys confirming that the pool sat entirely on Sarah's land, Karen had never let it go. The survey says otherwise, Sarah replied, turning back to her work. Surveys can be wrong. My grandfather's original deed clearly shows, Karen, please. Sarah spun around, exhaustion creeping into her voice. We've been to mediation twice. 3 different surveyors have confirmed the boundaries. The pool is on my property, and I have every right to remove it. You have no right. Karen's voice carried across the neighborhood. I use that pool. My grandchildren swim in that pool. You can't just destroy community property. Community property. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. For 3 years, Karen had treated the pool like her own personal resort. She'd throw parties without asking, leave pool equipment scattered around Sarah's yard, and once even had the audacity to give Sarah's neighbor a key to the pool gate for emergencies. It's not community property, Sarah said firmly. It's my property. And I'm tired of fighting about it. Karen's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. She pulled out her phone with the dramatic flair of someone drawing a weapon. Sarah watched in disbelief as Karen dialed with shaking fingers, 911. Yes, I need police immediately. My neighbor is destroying my property. She's vandalizing a shared swimming pool and, Karen, hang up the phone. Sarah's voice carried a warning edge. She's being violent and threatening. I'm not threatening anyone. Yes, I'll stay on the line. The address is 1247 Maple Street. Please hurry, she has a sledgehammer. Sarah stared in shock as Karen continued her dramatic performance for the 911 operator. After 3 years of boundary disputes, pool invasions, and constant harassment, Karen was actually calling the police on her for destroying her own property. This Is insane, Sarah muttered, pulling off her work gloves. She's very unstable, Karen continued into the phone, loud enough for Sarah to hear every word. I've been trying to resolve this property dispute amicably, but she's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Yes, she's still holding the hammer. Sarah looked down at the sledgehammer in her hands and carefully set it against the dumpster. The last thing she needed was to give Karen more ammunition. Karen said, apparently responding to the dispatcher, I own half of this pool. It's clearly stated in my grandfather's original property deed from 1952. She has no legal right to destroy shared property. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. Her lawyer, David Chen, asking for an update on the pool removal. She quickly typed back, Karen called 911. Claims I'm destroying her property. This is getting out of hand. His response came immediately, Do not engage. Police will see the surveys. You're protected. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one standing in his backyard listening to his neighbor fabricate a police report. Yes, officer, I'll be waiting, Karen said, ending the call. She looked at Sarah with a triumphant smile. They are on their way. I hope you're prepared to explain why you thought you could destroy someone else's property. Karen, you know this is my pool. We'll let the police decide that. Sarah's phone rang. David Chen. Sarah. I got your text. Where are you right now? In my backyard with Karen. She called 911. Good God. Listen carefully. Do not admit to anything. Show the police your surveys and permits. You have every legal right to remove that pool. I know, but no buts. Karen is in the wrong here, and calling in a false police report might actually work in our favor. Sarah heard sirens in the distance. Her chest tightened. She'd never had police called on her for anything, not even a speeding ticket. David, they are almost here. Stay calm. You're the property owner. You have documentation. Karen is making a nuisance call, and the police will figure that out quickly. The sirens grew louder. Sarah watched as Karen smoothed her hair and adjusted her blouse, preparing for her starring role as the victim of property destruction. There's something else, David continued, his voice taking on a strange tone. I've been doing some research into Karen's property claims. Her grandfather's deed. The one she keeps referencing. What about it? I had our title research specialist dig into the county records. Sarah, that deed doesn't exist. Not in the form Karen claims, anyway. Sarah's heart skipped. What do you mean? The original 1952 deed for her property shows completely different boundaries than what she's been claiming. In fact, according to the historical records, part of what Karen thinks is her backyard might actually be the call cut off as two police cars pulled into Sarah's driveway, their red and blue lights painting the morning in urgent colors. Karen straightened her shoulders and walked toward the approaching officers like she was greeting honored guests at her own garden party. Officers, thank goodness you're here, she called out, her voice carrying just the right note of distressed relief. I'm Karen Hutchins, and this woman has been destroying my property all morning. Two officers stepped out of the first car, a tall African-American man with sergeant's stripes and a younger woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. The second car produced two more officers who hung back, surveying the scene. I'm Sergeant Williams, the tall officer said. We received a report about property destruction. Can you tell us what's happening here? Karen launched into a rehearsed victim narrative. Officer, my family has lived next door for 60 years. My grandfather's original deed clearly establishes that the property line runs right through the middle of that pool. She installed it 3 years ago despite my objections, and now she's destroying it without any legal right to do so. Sergeant Williams looked at Sarah. And you are? Sarah Miller. This is my house, and that's my pool. On my property. She claims it's her property, Karen interjected, but I have documentation proving otherwise. This pool sits on both our lots, making it shared property. She can't unilaterally destroy it. The younger officer, whose nameplate read Henderson, was taking notes. Do you have the documentation with you? Karen's confidence flickered for just a moment. Not with me, but it's in my house. I can get it right now. That won't be necessary yet, Sergeant Williams said. He looked at Sarah. Do you have any documentation showing this pool is on your property? Absolutely. Sarah pulled out her phone. I have 3 different surveys, the original building permits and property deeds. My lawyer can verify everything. As she scrolled through her files, Sarah noticed the younger officer walking the perimeter of the demolished pool, measuring distances with her eyes. Henderson crouched down and examined some of the boundary markers that the surveyors had installed. Henderson called to Karen, can you show me where you believe the property line runs? Karen walked over confidently and pointed to a spot about 3 feet from the PO. The Channel 7 news van pulled up to the curb with the aggressive confidence of a predator sensing blood in the water. Sarah watched in horror as a perfectly coiffed reporter emerged, followed by a cameraman who immediately began scanning the scene for the best angle. Please step back, Sergeant Williams said to Karen, whose voice had risen to a pitch that was drawing stares from 3 blocks away. I will not step back. This is my property. Karen's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You're all part of this conspiracy to steal my land. Janet Morrison from Channel 7 approached with the practiced stride of someone who'd covered 1,000 neighborhood disputes. Excuse me, I'm Janet Morrison with Channel 7 News. Can someone tell me what's happening here? David Chen stepped forward smoothly, his lawyer instincts kicking in. This is a private property dispute that's being resolved through proper legal channels. No comment at this time. But Karen had spotted the camera and saw her chance for vindication. Yes. Yes, I'll talk to you. She rushed toward the reporter with desperate enthusiasm. These people are trying to steal my property. They've forged county documents and bribed officials. Janet Morrison's eyes lit up. This was better than a standard neighbor feud, this had conspiracy theories and public meltdown potential. What's your name and how long have you lived here? Karen Hutchins, and my family has owned this property for 60 years. That woman, she pointed dramatically at Sarah, installed a pool on my land and now she's destroying it to cover up the evidence. Sarah felt her stomach sink as she watched Karen play directly into the reporter's hands. This was about to become a public relations nightmare. Mrs. Hutchins, Janet Morrison continued, what evidence do you have that this is your property? My grandfather's original deed from 1952. It clearly shows the boundaries running right through that pool. David Chen pulled out his phone and started recording. If Karen was going to make public statements about forged documents and bribery, he wanted everything documented. Henderson approached Sarah quietly. We need to address the false report issue. Mrs. Hutchins called 911 claiming you were destroying her property, but the evidence clearly shows the property belongs to you. What does that mean exactly? It means we need to inform her that filing a false police report is a criminal offense. Given the circumstances, we may need to issue a citation. Sarah nodded, but her attention was pulled back to Karen's increasingly unhinged interview. They've been planning this for years. Karen was telling the camera. First they moved in next door, then they installed the pool to establish false occupancy rights, and now they've corrupted county officials to change the records. Mrs. Hutchins, Janet Morrison pressed, do you have any proof of this alleged corruption? The proof is right there. Karen gestured wildly at the destroyed pool. Why would someone destroy a perfectly good pool unless they were trying to hide evidence? Sarah's neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Patterson, approached hesitantly. Sarah, honey, what in the world is going on over here? Karen called the police because I demolished my own pool, Sarah explained, exhaustion creeping into her voice. It turns out she doesn't own any of the land she thought she did. That shed of hers, the one that's been there for 15 years. Apparently it's on my property. Has been the whole time. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. Well, I'll be damned. She's been so high and mighty about property rights all these years, and she's been squatting the whole time. The conversation was interrupted by Karen's voice reaching new decibel levels. I demand a federal investigation, she was shouting at the camera. This goes all the way to the top. The county, the surveyors, the lawyers, they are all part of it. Sergeant Williams walked over to David. Counselor, we need to address this situation before it gets more out of hand. Mrs. Hutchins has filed a false report, she's making public accusations of fraud and bribery, and she's becoming increasingly agitated. What are you recommending? We need to inform her that she's committed a misdemeanor offense. Given her current state, we may need to consider a psychiatric evaluation. Sarah felt a chill. She'd wanted Karen to face consequences for 3 years of harassment, but watching her neighbor have a complete mental breakdown on live television was disturbing. Officers, she said quietly, is there any way to handle this more privately? She's clearly not thinking straight. She called us here. She chose to make this public. And now she's making serious accusations on camera that could constitute defamation. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. Sarah, we have another problem. Karen's accusations are already going viral on social media. Someone's been live streaming this whole thing. Sure enough, Sarah could see several neighbors holding up phones, recording every word of Karen's meltdown. In the age of social media, private property disputes had a way of becoming public spectacles within minutes. The whole neighborhood's going to be talking about this for months, Sarah muttered. The whole city's going to be talking about it, David corrected. Karen just accused county officials of taking bribes on live television. That's going to get attention. Janet Morrison was now interviewing the police officers, clearly hoping to get official confirmation of the conspiracy allegations. Sergeant Williams was maintaining professional neutrality, but Sarah could see his patience wearing thin. We are investigating a report of property destruction, he told the camera. Our preliminary findings suggest the report may have been unfounded. Unfounded how? Janet pressed. The property in question appears to belong to the person who was destroying the structure, not to the person who filed the report. Karen, who had been momentarily distracted by something on her phone, suddenly realized what the officer was saying. Unfounded, she shrieked. It's not unfounded. Show them the surveys. Show them the fake documents. She rushed towards Sergeant Williams, waving her phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. I'm calling the FBI. This is a federal conspiracy. Henderson stepped between Karen and the group. I need you to calm down and step back. Don't touch me. This is assault. Police brutality. Sarah watched in amazement as Karen transformed every reasonable request into evidence of persecution. She was creating her own narrative in real time, turning herself into the victim of an increasingly elaborate conspiracy. David's phone rang. This is Chen. Yes, I'm watching it live. No, my client had nothing to do with. What do you mean trending on Twitter? He hung up and turned to Sarah with a grim expression. That was my partner. This whole thing is trending on social media. Under #Pullgate. Karen's accusations are spreading faster than we can contain them. What does that mean for me? It means you're about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. Even though Karen's claims are completely false, the story is already being twisted into corrupt officials help rich neighbor steal land. Sarah felt sick. She just wanted to remove a pool that was causing problems. Now she was being painted as the villain in some kind of municipal corruption scandal. Mrs. Patterson approached again, this time with 2 other neighbors. Sarah, we all want you to know that we support you. Karen's been claiming that easement area for years, and we all knew something wasn't right about it. You did? Honey, she's been parking 3 cars over there and acting like she owned the place. But I remember when you bought this house, the realtor specifically mentioned that side area as part of your lot. One of the other neighbors nodded. My husband helped your surveyor find the property markers when you had the pool installed. Those boundaries haven't changed. Sarah felt a wave of relief. At least her immediate neighbors understood the truth. Even if the internet was already spinning wild conspiracy theories, the relief was short-lived. Karen had spotted the group of neighbors and interpreted their support for Sarah as further evidence of the conspiracy. Look at them, she pointed accusingly. They are all in on it. The whole neighborhood has been turned against me. Janet Morrison's eyes widened with delight. This was turning into the kind of story that generated weeks of follow-up coverage. Mrs. Hutchins, are you saying your neighbors are also part of this alleged conspiracy? Yes. They've been lying about the property boundaries for years. They know I own that land, but they've been intimidated into silence. Mrs. Patterson looked offended. Karen Hutchins, I have known you for 20 years and I am not intimidated by anyone. That land belongs to Sarah and it always has. You're lying. You've been bought off. Bought off? Karen, honey, you need help. Sarah's phone started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, she realized. The story was spreading beyond local news. David, this is getting completely out of hand. Oh no. We need to. He was interrupted by the arrival of another police car. This one carried a different kind of authority, a detective in plainclothes who surveyed the scene with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many neighborhood disputes spiral into chaos. Sergeant Williams. I'm Detective Morrison. I understand we have a situation involving allegations of municipal corruption. Sergeant Williams nodded. Detective, we responded to a property destruction call, but it's evolved into something more complex. The complainant is making serious accusations against county officials. Detective Morrison looked at the news camera, the growing crowd of neighbors, and Karen, who was in. Detective Morrison ended his call and approached Karen with the measured steps of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. Sarah could see the shift in his demeanor. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute being handled by local patrol officers. Someone important had just gotten involved. Mrs. Hutchins, Detective Morrison said, his voice carrying new authority, that was the district attorney's office. Your allegations of municipal corruption are being taken very seriously. Karen's face lit up with vindication. Finally. Someone who understands the scope of this conspiracy. I need you to understand what's about to happen. When you make public accusations of bribery and fraud against county officials, it triggers an automatic investigation. You'll need to provide sworn testimony and evidence to support your claims. Good? I welcome the investigation. And if your allegations prove to be false, you could face charges for filing false reports, defamation, and potentially making terroristic threats against public officials. The smile faded from Karen's face. Terroristic threats? I never threatened anyone. Accusing elected officials of corruption on live television can be considered an attack on the integrity of local government. The DA takes that very seriously. Sarah watched as the full weight of the situation began to dawn on Karen. She'd been so focused on proving her property claims that she hadn't considered the legal consequences of her increasingly wild accusations. The second news crew had finished setting up, and a reporter Sarah didn't recognize was approaching with a microphone. Excuse me, I'm Brad Williams from Channel 12. We understand there are allegations of government corruption involving this property dispute. David Chen stepped forward quickly. No interviews without legal counsel present. But Karen pushed past him eagerly. Yes. I'm Karen Hutchins and I'm exposing massive corruption in the county assessor's office. Mrs. Hutchins, can you tell us specifically what kind of corruption you've discovered? They've been taking bribes to falsify property records. They changed my property boundaries to help my neighbor steal my land. Brad Williams turned to Detective Morrison. Detective, can you confirm these allegations are under investigation? The district attorney's office is reviewing Mrs. Hutchins' claims, yes. Sarah felt sick. Even though the detective was being careful with his words, the news report would make it sound like there was actual substance to Karen's accusations. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss. Sarah, I'm seeing news reports about you being involved in some kind of corruption scandal. Call me ASAP. This was becoming a nightmare. Sarah worked for a financial services company that required employees to maintain impeccable reputations. Even false allegations could jeopardize her career. David, I need to call my employer and explain what's happening. Don't say anything until we know how this plays out. Right now, you're just a property owner who demolished her own pool. Let's keep it that way. Detective Morrison's phone rang again. He answered with visible tension. Morrison. Yes, sir. The media coverage is expanding. Channel 12 just arrived and I see someone setting up a live stream. No sir, she's not backing down from her allegations. Karen was now in full performance mode for the second news crew, detailing her conspiracy theories with increasing embellishment. This corruption goes all the way to the top, she was telling Brad Williams. They've been systematically stealing property from longtime residents and transferring ownership to their friends and political allies. Sarah's neighbor Mrs. Patterson approached with a worried expression. Sarah, honey, this is getting completely out of hand. Karen's making it sound like there's some kind of organized crime ring operating out of City Hall. Oh no. I don't know how to stop it. She's sick, dear. This isn't just about property boundaries anymore. She's having some kind of breakdown. Through the growing crowd, Sarah could see more neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Some looked concerned, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. A few were clearly taking sides based on years of neighborhood politics that Sarah had tried to stay out of. Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down approached the news crew. Excuse me, I'd like to say something about this situation. Brad Williams turned his microphone toward her eagerly. And you are? I'm Linda Chen, and I've lived on this street for 12 years. Karen Hutchins has been causing property disputes with multiple neighbors for years. This isn't about corruption, it's about her refusing to accept legal property boundaries. Karen whirled around, her face contorting with rage. Linda. How much did they pay you to say that? Karen, nobody paid me anything. You've been fighting with the Johnsons about their fence, the Martinezes about their driveway, and now Sarah about her pool. The problem isn't the county, it's you. Lies. All lies. You're all part of the conspiracy. Sarah watched in fascination as Karen's worldview expanded to include every neighbor who contradicted her. Instead of questioning her own assumptions, she was incorporating more and more people into her conspiracy theory. Detective Morrison ended his second call and approached Sarah and David. I need to speak with you both privately. They moved away from the crowd to the relative quiet of Sarah's front porch. What's the situation? David asked. The DA is not happy about this media circus. Allegations of municipal corruption are serious business, especially when they are being broadcast on live television and spreading on social media. But the allegations are completely false, Sarah protested. I know that, you know that, but the public doesn't know that. And until this gets resolved, there's going to be a cloud of suspicion over everyone involved. David frowned. What are you suggesting? Mrs. Hutchins needs to either provide evidence for her claims or formally retract them. If she continues making unfounded accusations, she's going to face serious criminal charges. And if she retracts them, she'll still face charges for filing a false police report, but it won't be as severe. Sarah looked back at the growing circus in her backyard. Karen was now being interviewed by both news crews simultaneously, telling them about the decades-long conspiracy to steal property from longtime residents. Detective, she's not going to retract anything. She genuinely believes what she's saying. Then we have a problem. Because the DA wants this resolved quickly, before it undermines public confidence in county government. A new commotion erupted near the street. A black sedan had pulled up, and a woman in an expensive suit was stepping out. Even from a distance, Sarah could tell this person carried serious authority. Who's that? She asked. Detective Morrison looked over and cursed under his breath. That's Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Torres. This just became a very big deal. ADA. Torres surveyed the scene with the cool assessment of someone who dealt with political crises before. The news crews immediately noticed her arrival and began moving in her direction. Detective Morrison, she called out. Status report. We have a complainant making serious allegations against county officials. No evidence to support the claims, but extensive media coverage. Where's the complainant? Detective Morrison pointed to Karen, who was still holding court with the reporters. Torres studied Karen for a moment, taking in her agitated state and dramatic gestures. Has anyone attempted to de-escalate this situation? Every effort to present contradictory evidence has been interpreted by the complainant as further proof of conspiracy. Torres nodded grimly. Paranoid delusion with grandiose elements. Great. She looked at Sarah and David. Are you the property owner? Yes, Sarah Miller. And you demolished your own pool this morning? Yes, It was entirely on my property, according to multiple surveys. But your neighbor believes otherwise. My neighbor believes a lot of things that aren't supported by evidence, David interjected. Torres studied the survey documents on David's tablet, then looked back at the media circus surrounding Karen. Here's what's going to happen, she announced. We are going to conduct a formal investigation into Mrs. Hutchins' allegations. If we find any evidence of corruption or fraud, appropriate charges will be filed. If we don't, Mrs. Hutchins will face charges for filing false reports and making defamatory statements. How long will that take? Sarah asked. Given the media attention, we'll expedite it. 48 hours. Sarah felt her heart sink. 48 hours of being at the center of a corruption scandal, even a false one, could destroy her reputation and career. In the meantime, Torres continued, I strongly advise all parties to avoid further media statements. Let the investigation proceed without additional inflammatory rhetoric. As if summoned by those words, Karen's voice rose above the crowd noise. I have proof, she was shouting at the cameras. I have documents that will expose this entire criminal enterprise. Torres closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Or not. She walked toward Karen with the confident stride of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. The news crews immediately shifted their attention to her, sensing that someone important had arrived. I'm Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Torres. I understand you have allegations against county officials. Karen's eyes widened with excitement. Yes. Finally, someone from the real government. These local officials are all corrupt. I need you to understand that making false accusations against public officials is a serious crime. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity as Karen stared at the deed in Ada Torres' hands. Sarah could almost see the gears grinding in Karen's mind as she struggled to reconcile her grandfather's actual property description with the boundaries she'd believed in for decades. When Karen finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. They changed it. Excuse me? Torres asked. They changed the deed. Karen's voice grew stronger, more certain. This isn't the original. They replaced it with a fake. Sarah felt her heart sink. Even faced with her own family's documentation, Karen was choosing to believe in an ever-expanding conspiracy rather than accept that she'd been wrong. Mrs. Hutchins, Torres said carefully, this appears to be an authentic 1952 document. The paper shows appropriate aging, the typeface is consistent with the era, and it bears the original county seal. They forged it. Karen's voice climbed back toward hysteria. They broke into my house and replaced the real deed with a fake one. Detective Morrison looked alarmed. Are you claiming someone broke into your home? Yes. They must have. This isn't the real deed. When do you think this alleged break-in occurred? Karen's eyes darted around frantically. Recently. Maybe last week, or last month. Whenever they realized I was getting close to exposing them. Torres exchanged glances with Detective Morrison. Sarah could see them making calculations about Karen's mental state and what steps might need to be taken. Mrs. Hutchins, Torres said gently, if someone broke into your home to replace legal documents, that would be a very serious federal crime. Are you prepared to file a formal complaint? Yes. I want a full FBI investigation. The news crews were capturing every word, their cameras focused on Karen's increasingly agitated face. Sarah realized that Karen was now alleging multiple felonies, home invasion, document forgery, and a federal conspiracy, all to avoid admitting she'd been wrong about a property line. Detective Morrison interjected, filing false reports about home invasion and federal crimes carries severe penalties. Are you absolutely certain you want to make these allegations? I'm certain. They are trying to steal my property and they'll stop at nothing. Ada Torres looked at the deed again, then at Karen. Mrs. Hutchins, I need to ask you something very important. When was the last time you actually read this deed? Karen's confidence flickered. Oh. I've read it many times. When was the last time you read it carefully, word by word? I don't need to read it word by word. I know what it says. But when did you last actually examine the text? Karen's face was starting to flush again. My grandfather explained the boundaries to me when I was a child. He showed me the property line from the oak tree through the middle of what's now her pool area. Is it possible that your childhood memory might not be accurate? My memory is perfect. My grandfather would never lie to me. Sarah suddenly understood what was happening. Karen hadn't based her property claims on the actual deed, she'd based them on childhood memories of conversations with her grandfather. She'd probably never actually read the document carefully until this moment. David Chen seemed to reach the same conclusion. Mrs. Hutchins, did your grandfather ever show you the actual deed text, or did he just explain the boundaries verbally? He didn't need to show me the text. He walked the property line with me. But people can make mistakes about property lines, Torres pointed out. That's why we rely on written documentation rather than memory. My grandfather didn't make mistakes. The crowd was getting restless. What had started as a dramatic confrontation was turning into something more disturbing, a public mental health crisis playing out in real time. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. OMG, you're on CNN now. They are calling it suburban. Property war reveals government corruption claims. Are you okay? CNN. This local dispute had somehow escalated to national news coverage. Sarah felt dizzy thinking about how many people were now watching her neighbor's breakdown. Mrs. Patterson approached Sarah quietly. Honey, I think we need to call someone. Karen's not well. Who would we call? Does she have family? Adult children? Someone who can help her? Sarah realized she'd never really thought about Karen's family situation. In 3 years of conflict, she'd only ever dealt with Karen herself. I don't know. I've never seen anyone else at her house. That's part of the problem, Mrs. Patterson said sadly. She's been isolated over there, feeding her own delusions. Meanwhile, Ada Torres was trying to manage the deteriorating situation. Mrs. Hutchins, I strongly recommend that you take some time to review these documents privately, perhaps with legal counsel, before making any more public statements. I don't need legal counsel. I need the FBI. The FBI doesn't investigate local property disputes. They investigate federal conspiracies. Mrs. Hutchins, there's no evidence of a federal conspiracy. The evidence was destroyed when she demolished the pool. Torres looked around at the crowd, cameras, and growing chaos. Sarah could see her making a decision about how to proceed. Mrs. Hutchins, I'm going to ask Detective Morrison to escort you home so you can rest and consider your options. You've been under a lot of stress today. I don't need to rest. I need justice. You've made very serious allegations. If you continue making unfounded claims, you could face criminal charges yourself. For the first time all day, Karen seemed to hear the warning in someone's voice. Criminal charges. For what? Filing false police reports, making defamatory statements, and potentially making terroristic threats against public officials. I never made terroristic threats. When you accuse government officials of corruption and fraud without evidence, it can be interpreted as an attack on the stability of local government. Karen looked around wildly, as if just realizing that the situation had spiraled completely beyond her control. The news cameras, the crowd, the police, all of it suddenly seemed to register as real rather than theoretical. Oh. I just want my property back, she said, and for the first time all day, she sounded more confused than angry. Mrs. Hutchins, Torres said gently, according to all available evidence, no one has taken your property. Your boundaries are exactly where they've always been. But the pool was never on your property. Sarah watched as Karen's face crumpled. For just a moment, the conspiracy theories and paranoid delusions seemed to fade, leaving behind a confused, frightened woman who'd somehow lost touch with reality, but the moment didn't last. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Don't let them intimidate you, Karen. They are trying to silence you." Karen's head snapped up, and the paranoid fire returned to her eyes. "Yes. They are trying to silence me because I'm getting too close to the truth." Sarah felt like screaming. Every time Karen seemed ready to accept reality, something or someone reinforced her delusions. "Who said that?" Detective Morrison called out, scanning the crowd. A young man with a phone raised his hand. "I did. This is obviously a cover-up. Why else would they threaten her with criminal charges for exposing corruption?" "Sir, you need to step back," Morrison warned. "This is America. She has the right to expose government corruption." Several other people in the crowd murmured agreement. Sarah realized with horror that some of the onlookers were actually buying into Karen's conspiracy theories. Ada Torres looked around with growing concern. What had started as one person's delusions was beginning to spread to others. The combination of live media coverage, social media amplification, and anti-government sentiment was creating a perfect storm. "Detective Morrison," she said quietly, "we need to clear this area before this becomes a public safety issue." But it was too late. Karen had found her second wind, energized by the support from the crowd. "You see," she called out triumphantly. "Real Americans know corruption when they see it. You can't silence all of us." The young man with the phone started live streaming again. "This is what happens when citizens try to expose government corruption. They threaten them with jail." Sarah's quiet residential street was transforming into something resembling a political rally. More cars were arriving as word spread on social media. Some people were carrying signs they'd apparently made in their cars, "Stop government corruption," and to support Karen Hutchins. "This is insane," Sarah murmured to David. "How did this become about government corruption? I just demolished my own pool." "Welcome to the internet age," David replied grimly. "Facts don't matter anymore. Only narrative." Ada Torres was now speaking urgently into her phone, clearly calling for backup. The situation was spiraling beyond what a few local police officers could handle. Karen, meanwhile, was holding court with her new supporters, explaining her theory about the decades-long conspiracy to steal property from longtime residents. "It's not just my land," she was telling them. "They've been doing this all over the county. Changing records, bribing officials, stealing property from families who've lived here for generations." "How do we stop them?" someone shouted. "We demand a federal investigation. We demand that all county records be audited. We demand justice." The crowd cheered. Sarah watched in amazement as her neighbor's property delusion transformed into a grassroots political movement. Her phone rang again. This time it was her boss. "Sarah, I need you to explain what's happening. Our clients are asking questions about whether you're involved in some kind of municipal corruption scandal."